Hey everyone. Just realized my mic wasn't switched on. So yeah, if there's anyone in the chat, I see you there, DHC21. Yeah, let me know if my audio is coming through correctly. So yeah, we'll start in about 2 to 3 minutes. I'm just a few minutes early to make sure that everything is functioning as it should on the stream. Okay, awesome. I assume that you guys are hearing me, that the stream is functioning. So, Dejan, people are moving to Rumble, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. They're all shadow banning Christians. I think you're right. My software is giving me an error. Please use a keyframe frequency of 4 seconds or less. What does that mean? Excellent. Echte Kaffee, wie geht's? Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. Excellent, guys. Yeah, so OBS is giving me a small error. It says the stream is healthy, but apparently I have a keyframe issue. Now, the last time I made setting changes on the fly, it it caused an error. So yeah, if everything's good, then I think we'll just leave it at that. 20 July 1944. Hello there. Dodzor, thanks. Good to know. Sounds good. Excellent. End time. Thank you. Yeah, guys, I appreciate all the support. I'm looking forward to my next Sunday stream with AT. And yeah, it's been really, really great. So yeah, we still got 1 minute or so to go before I start the stream officially. But what you see here, this is the book that I will be reviewing. I'll be looking at least one chapter in this book. It is linked in the description, so if you want, download a copy. All right. Also, I know I've had some technical issues. I wish I could do Vincent Price's Hadith Sciences. Yeah, yes, Chris. It's a joke. Yeah, sciences. So yeah, it says my stream status is poor. It says I've got a keyframe issue, but I've made extensive adjustments to my streaming software. I've changed all the settings, removed everything that doesn't need to be here so that I don't have these strange crashes. So I've tried to change everything, reinstalled everything, cleaned up. So yeah, hopefully no more issues in the near future. Yeah, YouTube is showing me an error, but if things are good, then fine. So yeah, I even upgraded my internet account to be faster. So yeah, that should also improve things. I also bought a brand new router, so that gives me much better connectivity as well. Yeah, we should start in just a few seconds. Okay, it's 8 o'clock. Okay, so welcome everyone, wherever you happen to be. Dzień dobry, Marek. God bless you too. Thank you, guys. Much appreciated. Um, yeah, I, so yeah, welcome to everyone from Poland, from Germany. Meine deutsche Freunde. Und ja, and hello, Bruder. Yeah, yeah, good to have such good friends and to have met some great people. DHC, if you're American, you must realize Americans. I love Americans. I have many American friends. I used to travel to the US 3, 4 times a year on business and to see friends, but it's router, it's not router. And yeah, it's router, not router. Yeah. So anywho, let's get started. Glad to have you guys in the chat. Good to see you all there. So I want to talk about now. I've got about 19 slides. Do you have KL? That's nasty. Do I have a Daif computer? So I saved money 4 years ago. Right, I saved some money 4 years ago so that I could upgrade my computer, and I have an AMD Ryzen 9 3950X, 16 cores, 32 threads. I have 64 gigabytes of RAM, 3600 megahertz. I have a Samsung 970 EVO Plus main hard drive. I have an ADATA, an SPG 8200 Pro backup, my data drive. I've got SSDs in here. I have an NVIDIA RTX video card. I've got it's a really solid machine. It's very nearly state of the art. It's only just been replaced by the 59, at least the chip's been replaced by the 5950X. My motherboard is an MSI. Oh, good. It's the Creation MSI Creation motherboard, which is a $550 motherboard. So yeah, it's yes, I'm showing off. But dude, I saved this money years ago. I put it aside. I left it in a bank account, didn't touch it, so that when the time came, because my old computer was 7 years old or 8 years old, so it was due. And I saved this money so that when something good came out, I could do it. So I did. Thank you, Faith. Yeah. Okay, so I could launch satellites. You're right. You're right. It's pretty solid. It's pretty solid. So yeah, I did, invest. It's just I think I had some software bugs. I had some software configuration issues. I may still have them. Do the light gets dirty in the neighborhood? Not quite. But yeah, it does run pretty hot. It does run well. I mean, I've got good cooling on it and all that, but still. Um, yeah, I bought it especially for the sake of streaming and such. And yeah. Okay, guys. So let's get on to business. But thanks for the comments. I will keep an eye on the chat. So we're going to talk about Yasir Qadhi, and we're going to talk about his book, An Introduction to the Sciences of the Quran, quote unquote sciences, because man, it's a real question exactly how sciency this science is, right? So I want to give you a brief overview. Hope Faith. Also, don't forget, Lloyd, the enemy of our souls, is not happy with your work. He will try tricks. It is so weird how my system has crashed for odd reasons. I know what you talk about. I also like technology. Yeah, I was a systems administrator for 10 years at one point. I was a Unix systems admin. I used to do lots of work. Also, I was an Oracle database administrator. So yeah, I used to work with Oracle 10GR2 at the time and Unix Sun Solaris. I was Linux certified back in the day, but yeah, that was so. Now we've got Yaser Qadhi. Let's have a look at what this book covers because it's very interesting. I've linked to a copy on archive.org, which you can download, right? So slap that like button, do it now. Thank you. Right. He covers a bunch of different subjects. Like, look at this, the Quran, the linguistic meaning of the word Quran, the definition, the breakdown of the definition, the concept of the Kalam of Allah. Now, I will say this book is pretty good. It covers a great number of things. He does gloss over some things, keep that in mind. And on certain issues, I would not necessarily trust his conclusion, right? Some things you can find, remember, this is an introduction. And also, there are certain issues that are not necessarily supposed to be known by lay Muslims. So he doesn't cover those in detail. Those are meant for the alim, the ulama, right? The learned ones, the scholars. So to get that data, you need to go to other books. So he doesn't cover some of it. And also he does lead to one or two possibly misleading conclusions, right? Just keep that in mind. But you can see this is an extensive, detailed book. The beginning of the surahs, the different categories, the disjoint letters, the ahruf of the Quran, the meaning of the word ahruf. This is a good resource to look through. Right? Definitely some good things here. Although I might question one or two of the conclusions, I would get a second opinion. I would look at other resources. All right. Now, for instance, the qira'at. But now, what's important is today I want to talk about abrogation, the mantuk and the mafhum. That's relevant. Page 230. The abrogation in the Quran, al-nasikh wa al-mansuk. Right. The definition of nask, the breakdown, the salaf and the term nask, books written on nask, the proof of nask. So there's proof. Nask exists. Slap that. Yes. So scientific blunders. Yeah. You're saying my coal-powered laptop has been. Yeah, Dodzor. I, coal-powered is that, so you've got an early Steam model. Yeah, you might want to upgrade that one. The 2 pixel by 3 pixel screen. Not so good. So the sources of the nasikh and mansuk, the verse and ruling in the Quran, the rulings of the nasikh and mansuk, the blessing of nask, the benefits of nask, the benefits of knowing nasikh and mansuk, and of course he speaks here specifically of the verse of the sword, especially in this section from 251 to 256. While interesting, I would question some of what he says here, because when you go through the Sharia, when you go through the fiqh, this would be when you go through especially books like The Reliance of the Traveler or start to look at other scholars, here you might find that his conclusions are not necessarily complete or not necessarily accurate. Right? As I said, some of this knowledge is not for lay Muslims. Remember, I've said before, there are 4 levels of knowledge in Islam, right? So your lowest level is the ibara, which is the common understanding, the literal understanding, the plain meaning of whatever the text says. But this is no longer the understanding of the scholars. Then you've got the ishara, meant for the higher level, your imams. Imams are themselves divided into at least 4 levels, right? Some are just clerics, right? In other words, they're just like people who take notes, right? Like little clerks, right? Who work administrators. That's effectively it. Your highest level is a little different. Then you've got your third level, ishara, right? So you have the ibara, the ishara, and then you've got your third level, which is the lataif. These are, so the ishara are the nuances in the text. These are the non-literal applications or aspects of the text, the what is allegorical or what is implied. Your third level is the lataif. These are subtle truths within the text, and the fourth level, you're looking at the haqaiq, which is the ultimate reality, the ultimate truth. These are reserved effectively for the very top scholars of Islam, right? And typically, those are your Sufis. Right, so hold on. End time. How can one trust a man who admits he uses tawriya when exactly. And you know that if you've watched David Wood's Qadhi versus Qadhi, you'll realize that he contradicts himself all the time. So I would not take this too seriously. Yeah, Yaser Qadhi is not too ultra creepy dairy man. Thanks to Chris for that. Yeah, we should have had a little picture of a creepy looking dairy dude. Yeah, violating. Yeah, I've always said Yaser Qadhi is very much Orthodox. He is by no means a moderate. He is Orthodox. And he might claim to be an ex-Salaf. Well, he's still one. Um, yeah. Yaser Qadhi is ultra creepy day. Exactly. Hey, Cranky, how's it going? Yeah, but to the point. So understand, go through the book. There's some very good reading and there's some interesting stuff. You can learn a lot, but I would just question anything. Always go look up, always get a second opinion. Always look. Let me just skip forward to just look in the book itself. Let's jump to 250. So for instance, he suspects I jumped too far. Let me go forward. Right, the nasikh and the manuk. Now he does speak of various things, right? You've got, oh, in the Quran, notice they have a thing called the clear and the unclear verses, the clear and unclear verses. Keep that in mind, right? Certain verses are unclear and they can only be translated by the scholars or interpreted. So that's why you will always hear it depends how it's interpreted. Understand? So the term, when they say it depends on how it's interpreted, what they mean is it ibara, ishara, lataif, or haqaiq? Who's interpreting it? Why are they interpreting it? How? Etc. The scholars see things very differently to your lay Muslim. Your lay Muslim is only allowed at the basic, literal, plain meaning textual level. You, remember, you are lower. You are the lowest of beasts, right? You are even lower than the lay Muslim. You're worth 1/2 to 1/3 of a Muslim legally. So how can you be privy to the higher level of knowledge? You're not. This is denied to you. You're not even supposed to know this, right? So he speaks of the nasikh and the mansuk, right? And they talk about these things here. So you can see that this is very much, right? So after the subject of tafsir, the topic that has been given the most attention in the studies of the Quran is that of nask. All right. So let me go to a different page. So let's have a look here at the Brill Encyclopaedia of Islam. Brief diversion. This is the gold standard of academic studies on Islam. This is written by Muslims as well, loads of them, right? And if you want, I can link a copy in the description in the chat later or in the comment section. But nasikh, an abrogator, al-nasikh wa al-mansuk. Nask, the act of cancellation, abrogation. So, a new verse, right? A nask verse, right, abrogates a previous verse. That verse becomes mansuk. It's cancelled. It's literally cancelled, right? It is abrogated. And also, the scholars will quite bluntly tell you that many of the verses were cancelled because Allah had to do it because Muhammad made mistakes, right? Muhammad made mistakes. He misinterpreted. So Allah had to go like, oh, good grief, Mo, you dumbass. Cancelled things because of Mo's mistakes. But this concerns verses and traditions which, when compared, suggest frequent, serious conflict. There was frequent, serious conflict, and thus there had to be abrogation, right? This is covered in chapter 7 of the Encyclopedia of Islam, page 1009b. I'll step forward to some of that here. Nask, this is a slightly longer treatment, a comparison of verse with verse, hadith with hadith, hadith with verse, and Quran with hadith, and with the fiqh. This is the Islamic law. So I need you to understand, we always listen to Muslims tell us about, oh, Quran verse, abrogating Quran verse. This is just this is 20% of what's going on here, right? Because Quran verses abrogate Quran verses. Hadith abrogate other hadith. Hadith can abrogate the Quran, and the Quran can abrogate a hadith. Understand? And they speak of the fiqh here, right? Islamic law. So you have to, the final arbiter, the final understanding of what is left over after all of this complex abrogation is in the Sharia law and the fiqh, the Islamic law. This is the final source here, the fiqh. So this suggests frequent, serious conflict. Okay? So the Prophet's mission had extended over a quarter of a century, inspired the idea of gradual development in the details of the regulations introduced in both Quran and Sunnah. So nask applies to each of the two sources and to the relations between them. Right? So there are rules that we are not privy to. So hadn't recently released a video in which Yaser Qadhi showed, yes, he did. I can't help but follow your assumption that Islam is just Gnosticism with a monotheistic twist. Yes, it's Gnosticism. If you read the Sharia, it bluntly states it is Gnostic. Right? End time haq, yeah. So, yeah, but thanks. Yeah, those are subjects I'll get into more, but those are not subjects that I'm as familiar with because I haven't studied that as deeply. So, most accepted, now they say most scholars, the top scholars of Islam, accepted nask of the Quran by the Quran. So, one Quranic verse abrogating another. And they accept the nask of hadith by hadith. Do you have a list of the hadith that were cancelled? No, you don't. So when Muslims start quoting you hadith, how do you know that hadith is still valid? You don't. The nask of the Quran by the hadith, and of hadith by Quran raised more delicate issues which divided the scholars. Certainly was division, but this doesn't mean there was no ultimate consensus, because there was. Right? There might be slight differences, but this doesn't mean that no one knows what's going on. It doesn't mean that no one is able to make a decision. Muslims like to imply that. They'll say, well, the scholars don't know what's going on, so therefore me, as a dumbass Muslim who knows absolutely nothing, need to listen to me. No, that's not how it works. Right? The final understanding is very much within the Islamic law, within the fiqh. Right? So now I'm going to minimize this for a moment, and we're going to go into my presentation. Right? Any questions from anyone in the comment? Any questions from the yeah, Yaser Qadhi evolution? It's more like Yaser Qadhi uncovered. It's more like he's revealing himself. Right? Okay, guys. So hadiths do abrogate the Quran. Now, of course, before we start, let's think about when you're 6 and he's 53. This is just terrible, but this seems appropriate. Yeah. Yeah, welcome to Islam. Now, I want to show you, these are 3 hadith from Aisha. Now, either Aisha is telling the truth or Aisha is a liar. Take your pick. I will tell you that the scholars will just throw Aisha under the bus when she says anything that they don't like that concerns Muhammad. That's a discussion for another day. But Aisha said, I often scraped semen from the garment of the Messenger of Allah with my hand. She's 6 years old. That's Ibn Majah, Volume 1, Book 1, Hadith 537. You'll find something like 20, you'll find 24 of these if you look through the Hadith, right? At least 24. Right. Are these cancelled Hadiths in the Bukhari and Muslim collections? Yes, they are. For instance, Bukhari is supposedly recorded to have reviewed 600,000 Hadith. And he chose for his collection something like, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000, whatever is in his Sahih collection. Hanbal, of the Hanbali school of fiqh, the founder of that school of fiqh, he apparently catalogued and studied 750,000 hadith, and he only kept 7,000, so less than 1%. Right? So apparently Malik went through 550,000 hadith and only kept about 4,000. So again, like 0.5%. So what you're looking at is the vast majority, 99.5% of all hadith are considered effectively fraudulent. I don't think that's a very good track record to base off any decisions. That's incredible. So Aisha said, I used to scrape off the semen from the garment of the Messenger of Allah. Sahih Muslim, Book 2, Hadith 567. Aisha, in case I found semen on the garment of the Messenger of Allah dried semen on the garment of the Messenger of Allah, I scraped it off with my fingernails. Sahih Muslim, Book 2, Hadith 572. Um, yeah, you can find a couple of dozen of these if you look, but that's what I found so far, you know. So I'm assuming there's many, many more that I haven't found yet. So yeah, this gives us an insight into Muhammad, and I would love Muslims to explain just what the heck's going on here. Right, that's a crime today. That's a crime. So now, before we begin, so we've been told, or have you been told, that there is no abrogation in Islam? Probably yes, you have. I get told that all the time. Have been told that hadiths cannot abrogate the Quran. Now, in theory, yes, that is true. In practice, no, that is not the case. Right? Now, we know this is false, and this is explained to us, at least in this example, by the scholarly work of Sheikh Yasir Qadhi, PhD. Right? Those yeah, yeah, in time. Yeah, imagine what was in those 700,000 hadiths. Who knows? Think 700,000, 750,000 plus 550,000. That's already what you're looking at 1.3 mil. Plus another 600, you're looking at 1.9 million hadiths. 1.9 million. That's insanity. And of which they've only kept like what, 15 or 20,000. The rest had to be tossed out. So, I mean, if you want to say that, think about it. Someone work out, well, what percentage is like 20,000 of 1.9 million, and that's not even all the hadith, right? What percentage is? It's incredible. It's like 0.5%. Is Yaser Qadhi Sunni? He's Sunni, right? So yeah, let's continue. Now, for a broader, more detailed explanation on this, I have done a show with on Thaddeus' channel in the past. Here's the link. You guys can look it up. It's also in the description. And I will be repeating this on my channel at some point. I'll do a bit more research and run it on my channel as well as a follow-up to this one. But let's start with this, the Introduction to the Science of the Quran by Yaser Qadhi. Now, abrogation in the Quran is called naskh wa al-manuk, the abrogating and the abrogated, right? Abrogating, abrogated. Now, he tells us the definition of nask. Both of the words nasikh and mansuk come from the root naskh, which has the following meanings: to remove, to abolish, to abrogate. To remove, to abolish, to get rid of, to throw in the trash. For example, Allah says in the Quran, we do not abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten, except that we bring something that is better. So in other words, they do cause something to be forgotten, except they bring something that is better than it. So remind me, I need to show you guys a verse later, because Qadhi tells us in his, if I go down here, Qadhi does tell us later in the book, and I don't think I mentioned it here, but he actually explicitly states that certain things have been forgotten. They've been abolished from memory. So certain verses, certain learning from Islam has been abolished from memory. I'll get to that later. Remind me to find it before I forget. Early Muslims were fabricating, exactly, they fabricated tons of them. Did Aisha save the scraping to use for seasoning? Oh, disgusting. Disgusting. So, right. So in other words, okay, so to replace or to supersede. Now, if you look in the Sharia, if you read through the indexes to the Islamic law manuals, you'll find that that basically mansuk, nask, is known as supersession, right? To supersede, to replace with, right? To replace, to supersede. It's filed under supersession. As for its definition in Islamic sciences, it is the abrogation of a ruling by a ruling revealed after it. Therefore, at least two rulings must be involved: the nasikh and the mansuk. Right? The nasikh ruling is the ruling that repeals the mansuk. Right? The abrogating is the rule that removes, cancels the mansuk. Nasikh, the active participle, is the ruling that does the abrogating, while mansuk, the passive form, is the ruling that is abrogated. So here we've got a sheikh with a PhD who runs the Islamic Seminary of America, and he's telling us that this is real. And you've got anonymous Muslim 69 in the comments telling you that it's not real. And when you ask him to cite you some evidence, well, he struggles to provide that, doesn't he? Now, he says that at least two rulings must be involved, at least two verses must be involved, because there can be more than one nasikh or mansuk verse. In other words, more than one verse can abrogate a ruling. So more than one new verse can abrogate a previous ruling. So there could be multiple corroborations of a verse being repealed by later verses. And one verse can also abrogate more than one ruling. So a single verse can abrogate numerous other verses, which technically are legal rulings, which is why I've told you before, an imam is not a priest. An imam is a lawyer, right? Imam is a lawyer, right? Not priests, lawyers. Remember that. Not priests, lawyers. Right, the Hadiths even steal from the Bible, Matthew 25. Can you paste that so I can read that? That's an interesting point. The son of Adam, I was sick, but you did not. Okay, well, yeah, so the breakdown of the definition. So we've got 18 slides. There's not too many today. The phrase, the abrogation, implies that the first ruling has been completely repealed. It is cancelled. Now, of course, it's important to know that there is a doctrine in Islam that, well, there are two doctrines that are coupled together, right? Called azima and rukhsa. So azima, A-Z-I-M-A, means strict adherence to Islam. So those are your Orthodox Muslims. Those are your extremists. The small minority of extremists, those are simply following the doctrine of azima. They are just being strict. They're following the Sharia strictly. You have rukhsa, which is a looser following. It's where you can ignore certain tenets of Islam. You don't have to quite go that far, right? So this allows you to pick and choose a little bit. This allows you to ignore things, and then later on you'll get around to the full thing when you can. But for the sake of convenience, you pick and choose a little bit. You don't quite do the full adherence to the Sharia, right? So they're allowed to get around. Well, they're allowed to not fully follow the law. So in other words, they can still apply an old law that was cancelled for now. And then later on, once they have more political control, then they have to do the full application of Sharia law, because nowhere in the world is Sharia fully applied yet, except in ISIS territory, and we know how that went. So the abrogation implies that the first ruling has been completely repealed, right? So nask involves abrogating the first ruling completely, right, in toto. In other words, the first ruling is not applied in any circumstances or conditions. So according to Yasir Qadhi, the first ruling has been completely cancelled. It is no longer valid. It may as well not even exist. Except according to, for the sake of convenience, they can throw it at you and say, here, but yeah, Allah says something pretty, except it's actually cancelled. And later on, once they have political control, that's going to go away very, very fast to be replaced by chop off their heads, as you probably are aware. Right, so let me go. So sorry, did I lose my spot? So this ruling is not applied in any circumstances or condition. Nask must involve an actual abrogation of a previous Islamic law, right? So the Quran actually creates legislation, right? As do the Hadith. They are the source of the law. They're not the final output of the law, but they're the source of the law, right? And therefore it is different from another phenomenon called bada, but we'll skip that. In order for the nas to occur, there must have previously existed an Islamic ruling on exactly the same subject, which was then abrogated by a later ruling. So there must have been a precedent set, and the nask basically cancels that precedent, overrides and supersedes that precedent. So the phrase of a ruling implies that nask is only valid in law and not in belief, in aqidah. So that's their creed. Aqidah is creed, right? So for instance, we have the Nicene Creed, right? And they have their own creeds as well. So the nasikh is valid in law. So in other words, if it abrogates the Quran is a legal document, it's a legal text, which makes Islam a legal system and a political system. And very little of it is actually a religion then. So nask cannot occur with regards to belief in Allah, His names and attributes, the Day of Judgment, and other matters related to the fundamentals of belief. So He has ordained for you the same religion which He ordained for Noah. So now you know, according to Yaser Qadhi, let me see, Cal, Sharia law is based on a savage pagan totalitarian civilization. It's full of holes, of course. And so according to Yaser Qadhi, Allah has ordained for Muslims the same religion, and for you, of course, as this person watching me, He ordained for you the same religion which He ordained for Noah. So now you know Noah was a Muslim. And that which we have inspired to you, O Muhammad, and that which we have ordained for Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. So Muhammad is following the same religion as Noah, who was a Muslim, Abraham, who was a Muslim, Moses, who was a Muslim, and Jesus, who was a Muslim, saying that you should establish the religion and make no divisions in it. That's Quran 142, verse 131. So chapter 142, verse 131. You should establish the religion and make... So yeah, so all these other failures obviously didn't do the job right, and Mo had to come along and fix it. I keep losing my mouse. So, also the ruling that is abrogated, the manuk, must originate in the Quran or the Sunnah. Nask cannot occur with respect to ijma, which is the consensus of the scholars, and this is the actual final ruling. The ijma, the consensus of the scholars, is contained within the fiqh, the Islamic law. It's written in the books of Islamic law. Or qiyas, analogy, which is how they derived the law. So you take the application. So the Quran says something, so how do you apply that general rule to a specific situation in Islamic life? Well, that's what the analogy provides. Of course, by the same token, they'll say Jesus never said this, but Paul did that. Well, Paul's applying, that's called qiyas, by analogy, reasoning by analogy. He's applying this concept to this new situation. How do we follow the spirit of the law rather than the letter? Of course, it's okay in Islam, but when Paul does it in Christianity, Paul's an evil Satanist who corrupted Christianity, right? When Muhammad does it, it's just all good stuff. So in other words, no ruling that is derived from ijma or qiyas can be abrogated. Now that's very interesting, right? A ruling that the scholars derive, right, can be abrogated. You can't abrogate the scholars. That's interesting. Am I reading this correctly, guys? Am I reading this correctly? So the ruling must originate in the Quran or Sunnah, and nask cannot occur with respect to ijma, the consensus, or the method of reasoning, of deriving a ruling by the scholars. In other words, no ruling that the scholars derive, right, through qiyas, and that ultimately becomes the law, the consensus, the agreed upon meaning, the agreed upon ruling by all the scholars of the four schools of jurisprudence, can be abrogated. So the scholars cannot be abrogated. So if the scholars said, if the Quran says the sky is blue and the scholars now say the sky is purple, because Allah did this and there's that and there's this in the Quran and this in the Sunnah, and actually what he meant by blue was purple, then well, you cannot argue with the scholars. The scholars are right, because the scholars have correctly interpreted the Quran. They've discovered the meaning that you as a layman don't know. So this is due to the fact that nask can occur only during the lifetime of the Prophet, right? And whereas ijma and qiyas must occur after the Prophet, as any student of usul al-fiqh knows, therefore these cannot be abrogated. Okay, well, Quran 42:13, Islam's totalitarian system, which there are components, religious, military, economic, and social. Yes, it is. It's basically communism with Allah. So yeah, let's move on. Lastly, this phrase also implies that the understanding of a verse, the mafhum, can also be abrogated, even though its explicit wording, the mantuk, remains applicable. Now we learn about another kind of abrogation. So the verse can say, be kind to your neighbor, right? So they're not allowed to change the wording, because the wording is the wording. The wording is as it exists. However, later on, somewhere else, Allah said something else. He said, murder your neighbor and rape his wife, right? For argument's sake, right? Steal his sheep, right? Now, even though the wording says be kind to your neighbor, that is the mantuk. That's the explicit wording. The mafhum means steal all his sheep, slaughter them, burn his house down, take all his gold, right? Enslave his children. That is the mafhum, right? So the understanding that be kind to your neighbor, that understanding is not abrogated by other things that have happened in the Quran and the Sunnah. And so even though the explicit wording remains as it is read and understood very differently. This is insanity. Am I reading this correctly? What are your guys' thoughts in the comments? But am I reading this correctly? So even though it says something and apparently means something, it can be understood to mean something completely different. That's mantuk and mafhum, right? A completely different kind of abrogation. So the phrase by ruling means that the nasikh ruling, the one that does the abrogating, must also come from Quran or Sunnah, okay? And also, ijtihad, personal reasoning, or qiyas, analogy, cannot abrogate a ruling from the Quran or Sunnah. So the ruling must come from the Quran or the Sunnah, okay? Personal reasoning and analogy cannot abrogate a ruling from the Quran or Sunnah. Okay, fine. Be that as it may. So the wording of a verse remains the same, but the meaning of the verse has changed, and they don't tell us about that. Right. So hopefully I'm understanding and interpreting this correctly. So also I want to make a point that comes up regularly. Yes, it is a mess, Marek. It's a total mess. Do not confuse Salafiyya with Salaf. Right? The phrase that was revealed after it implies that the manuk ruling, the ruling that is abrogated, must precede the nasikh ruling in time. So obviously you something comes later that supersedes something before it, right? So this implies the nasikh. Okay, so Salafiyya, right, and Salaf are different. Now he speaks of the Salaf and the term nask. Now people say, well, these are Salafis, right? They speak of the 1950s and Salafis. The Salafis go back to, the Salafis go back to the 17 or 1800s, right? They go back to the 17th century, 18th century. So they go back a significant amount of time. They're not a 1950s phenomenon. Now it should be pointed out that the Salaf did not use the word nask to refer exclusively to abrogation. They also use the term to apply to specification, takhsis, and initiation, but those are two different concepts. I haven't read those, I haven't covered those, so I don't know exactly what those are, but they're in the book if you want to read it. So the first person to limit the meaning of the word nask to apply to abrogation was Imam Shafi. So Shafi is the one who basically formalized the use of the Sunnah as a legal text to supplement the Quran, and thus he basically codified the approach that is taken between, well, the approach to Islamic law that is followed today. So he was basically the first guy to unite the tradition versus the using reasoning and marriage of the two to understand Islam. So in his famous treatise on Usul al-Fiqh called Al-Risala, now oddly enough, he wrote two books called Risala about 30 years apart, and the first one is effectively defunct. The second one is also technically not in use. It has been built on by other scholars, most famously probably Nawawi, and all the newer Islamic law treatises for the Shafi school of jurisprudence have taken all of Shafi's work, incorporated them, built upon them. So his actual books, while are very simple, very basic actually by comparison, and so but effectively obsolete. So when coming across statements from the scholars of the first three generations that claim that a particular verse was abrogated by another verse, this cannot immediately be taken as an example of nasikh. Now he's referring to the Salaf. The Salaf are the early followers, the first three generations of followers of Muhammad. And they're said to be the truest generation. And after that, Muslims have become diluted, right? So they're no longer as pure as those first followers. So the Salaf and the Salafi and the Salafiyya, those are different things. Salafiyya and Salaf are two different things, right? So this exact factor, which has been one of the greatest causes of confusion with regards to the numbers of nasikh and mansikh verses in the Quran, right? So nasikh at one time meant something different. Under Shafi, I think in the 10th century, it started to mean something a little different. Right, moving on. Now, there are a number of books written on nask. Let's see, it's a mess. Is Imam Shafi a Sheikh al-Islam? Yes, Shafi is a Sheikh al-Islam. To my knowledge, yes, he is. Sorry. So due to the importance of this topic, there have been a great many books written on nasikh and mansikh verses of the Quran. Okay. So after the subject of tafsir, the topic that has been given the most attention in the study of the Quran is that of nask. Tafsir is important, nask is important, right? Understanding. So in fact, it is compulsory, it is obligatory for a qadi, in other words, an Islamic judge, right, a sheikh, to know about abrogation in the Quran. And this is where this actually conflicts with what Qadhi concludes, Yaser Qadhi concludes at the end. He says, well, there's maybe one verse, there's maybe 5 verses, there's maybe like just 8, in fact, could be half a dozen, hell, there could be nothing that's actually been abrogated. There's just a handful. So if there's just 1 or 2, why is it compulsory for someone who studies to become an advanced Sheikh of Islam, have to study the subject and have to know which verses abrogate which? It is compulsory for a Sheikh, a judge of Islam, to know what's abrogated and what is not. And they take years to study this. If there's a handful, like 5 verses that are abrogated, then why don't they just give you a freaking A5 page, it's printed, and say, here you go, these are abrogated, let's move on to the next lesson. But they don't. You spend years to study them. So there must be dozens, hundreds that have been abrogated. So one of the first to write a treatise concerning this topic is the famous successor, Qatada as-Sudusi. Some of the more famous authors have written on this topic, who are Ibn Shihab al-Sukhri, Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Ibn Hanbal is very important because he's obviously the founder of one of the schools of jurisprudence, right? He's the guy that read, I think, what did I say, 550,000 hadith, and then made his own collection of 7,500 or whatever. Abu Dawud, of course, from the Kitab al-Sittah, one of the 6 canonical books of hadith. And Tirmidhi, also very, very highly respected scholar and major scholar of both tafsir and as well as, I think, hadith. And both of Sunan fame, yes, both of Sunan. So Sunan, Sunnah, this is a plural of Sunnah. And Ubayd al-Qasim, whose book is considered to be the best classical discussion of the subject. So if anyone wants to go look that up, by all means. Without a doubt, the most thorough discussion of the topic of nask written in this era is the book An-Naskh fi al-Quran by Dr. Mustafa Zaid. In it, the author discusses practically every verse that has ever been claimed to have been abrogated and offers his own conclusions on the validity of each claim. Another excellent work is Al-Ayat al-Mansiikh fi al-Quran by Dr. Abdullah ibn Muhammad, blah, blah, blah. Right. So here we have sources that we can look at. I haven't looked at these myself. I haven't even looked for them or downloaded them. But it's worth looking at. Now they offer conclusions, and that's nice. They can offer conclusions. Here's the thing. Islam is already founded. The laws are already written. Some new doctor, whoever the heck, okay, Zakir Naik here, he can't come along and change Islam. He has to respect what has already been interpreted by the scholars. You have to follow it. They can't go and rewrite Islam. Sure, they can lie to you, but no, they can't. Islam's already been decided, the ijma, the consensus of all the scholars, right, of all the lawyers of Islam, it's already fixed. There's very little wiggle room. Now, I'll say the scholars don't agree. Nonsense. That's just rukhsa. Both of those are doctrines that are accepted by Allah, and you're rewarded for them, whether you are azima, strictly following, or rukhsa, which is basically facilitation, loosely following, right? Those are still valid. The proof of nask. The vast majority of the scholars have upheld the validity of nask. Okay, some may have raised doubts. That's all fine and well. Okay. Now, Abu Muslim was the first scholar to deny the validity of nask, and in this he went against the consensus. Now notice, Abu Muslim went against the consensus of all the scholars before him. So he went against the consensus. So Abu Muslim's view has been aptly refuted, because you cannot win against the ijma. You cannot win against the scholarly consensus. This is the agreement, right? So this is the agreement of all the scholars. We've agreed that this means this, and that's it. Moving on. So Abu Muslim's view has been aptly refuted, since the Quran and Sunnah is very explicit on the occurrence of nask. So the Quran and the Sunnah are explicit on the occurrence of nask. The Quran says, and before we go on, so ijma, just to bring a point, what ijma is in law, it is the third, and in practice, the most important of the sources of legal knowledge in Islam. Notice he didn't say holy knowledge, he said legal knowledge. Understand, they're not priests, they are lawyers. I want to drive that home. Being the unanimous agreement of the community, right, on a regulation imposed by Allah, on a law imposed, right? Not, it's law. Allah is a lawyer. Technically, ijma is the unanimous doctrine and opinion of the recognized religious authorities at any given time. Don't forget, the earliest of the scholars were the best of the scholars. The later ones are the watered down ones. So everyone respects the earliest ones. No one goes against the founders. So it should be pointed out, Abu Muslim did not deny the validity of what has been defined as nask, but he did not name it as such. For him, every manuk was specified by the nasikh to have been meant only for a limited time. So now it says he denied, earlier we saw he denied the idea of abrogation, but what he's saying is it wasn't cancelled. It's just this is a subtlety, it's a difference. He's saying the verse wasn't cancelled by this verse. God did not have, did not have contradictions, because, contradictions are bad, right? I mean, Allah's not the author of confusion. So what he's saying, no, this was only just for a temporary time. It was just for a temporary time. So it was just basically valid for that time, and then it faded away, right? That ended, and now here's a new rule because this time is past, that circumstance is gone. Of course, we have covenants in the Bible, multiple covenants. We have 4 major covenants, 16 minor covenants, if I remember, hundreds of covenants throughout the Bible. But of course, when God does that in the Bible, it's like, doesn't God know what's going on? Well, yeah, thanks, Muslims. So they do the same thing. Their scholars say the same things. But when it happens in Christianity, it's like, and we came first. It's confusion, because Islam doesn't change. But here, I don't know. You tell me what the scholars are saying. Moving on. So Abu Muslim's view has been aptly refuted, since the Quran and Sunnah is very explicit on the occurrence of nask. So the Quran says we do not abrogate a ruling or cause it to be forgotten, except that we substitute in its place something better than it or similar to it. Allah is capable of all things, including evil lie, and yeah. So that's Allah, capable of all things. So when we change a verse in the Quran in place of another, and Allah knows best what He sends down, they say, "You, O Muhammad, are but a forger." Nay, but most of them are ignorant. So people obviously realized that Muhammad was changing his mind, and this is, yeah. So people were commenting back then already. However, Qadi does tell us in these verses the concept of nask is very explicit. So why are Muslims arguing with us about this? If Allah says this, and the scholars of Islam say this, and Yaser Qadhi, PhD, says this. Treasure best, good job with all this work. Thank you. So apart from these verses, there are numerous instances in the Quran or Sunnah when nask has been mentioned explicitly. For example, initially, a Muslim in battle was prohibited from fleeing from the enemy if he were faced with 10 enemy soldiers, a ratio of 10 to 1. Allah then revealed, Allah has lightened your burden, for He knows that there's a weakness in you, so if there are 100 of you, they shall overcome 200. The ratio was reduced to 1 Muslim for every 2 non-Muslim soldiers. So now if you fought double your force, like, yeah, whatever, things have changed. So in this verse, he says the occurrence of nask is explicit. So now you know, nask is explicit. With regards to nask in the Sunnah, the classic hadith that is quoted is the Prophet's statement, and this is Muhammad's statement, of course. I used to forbid you to visit graves, but now you may freely do so, for they remind you of death. Once again, the occurrence of nask is explicit. So according to Yaser Qadhi, Sheikh PhD, Hadith also have nask, they have abrogation. Pinpoint, since Mutazilites were defeated, new thinking is forbidden. Yes, exactly. They were just murdered by Ghazali, if I recall. So it was narrated from Ibn Masud that the Messenger of Allah said, I used to forbid you to visit the graves, but now visit them, for they will draw your attention away from this world and remind you of the hereafter. So this is an explicit example of abrogation. Now in the first one, they say narrated by Al-Hakim in Qadhi's book, but I went and looked up all the other instances of this. And as you can see, we have Sunan Ibn Majah, Volume 2, Book 6, Hadith 1571. Sunan an-Nasai, Volume 6, Book 51, and you've got the Hadiths there. 5654, 55, 4434, you name it. You can read it on the screen yourself. Yeah. So there's multiple examples, as well as Muwatta Malik. Malik, of course, being the founder of the Maliki school of fiqh, if I'm correct. Book 23, Hadith 8. So there are numerous examples of that. The whims of Muhammad, yes, cranky, definitely. Now, the conditions for nask. There are a number of conditions that the scholars of Islamic law and the study of the Quran have laid down in order to substantiate any claim of nask. One of the reasons for this is that nask is called only as the last resort, since the very concept of nask implies discarding a ruling for another one. As long as both rulings can be applied, nask is not resorted to. Now, this leads to an interesting dualism, a duality, an interesting contradiction within Islam. Two rules can be completely contradictory, and both be true at the same time. That is a dilemma within Islam. They don't see it as a dilemma. For them, this is absolutely normal because God is logos. God is logical, right? The universe has order. Allah can do anything. Allah is not constrained by logic. See, Yahweh, God, cannot do contradictories, whereas Allah can. See, Allah can be good and truthful and evil and lie because Allah can do anything. This is an understanding that we need to define very clearly and understand very clearly. Allah is will, the will to do anything. It's like the child throwing a tantrum. He just wants what he wants. He can do what he wants. This is rather psychopathic. It's will to power. Whereas God is logos. God is reason. God is logical. Yes, very handy. You can change the law, Pinpoint says. Yeah, and that's true. You can change it on a whim whenever you like. Because you see, because if you say Allah can't do something, Allah is no longer all powerful. Right? So God is logos, Allah is will. These are very different. God is moral. Allah does whatever the heck He pleases whenever He feels like it. Those are very, very different concepts of morality. And in fact, you can argue that Allah would be immoral, and sure you'd be correct. The more important conditions are as follows. So these are contradictory rulings, remember, remain valid. They may be contradictory, but they are both valid. So for instance, kill the unbelievers, don't kill the unbelievers. Well, if it's not convenient to kill him right now because you'd be arrested and shot, or maybe the guy's carrying a gun and he'd shoot you himself, don't do it because, it's not convenient. You don't want to get shot, do you? But Oh, now we can kill them on a bridge, stab them with a knife, cut off their heads in a church, kill them at school. Yeah, go ahead. All good, because now you can. That's what it is. This is insanity. Allah equals Muhammad, says Marek. Yeah, I would think so. So the most important conditions for nask to have occurred is that the two rulings in question must contradict each other. So you have Muslims, John Q, anonymous Muslim in the comments will say, Islam does not contradict Islam, right? The Quran does not contradict itself. There are no contradictions. Yet, to have abrogation occur, there must be contradiction. Verses must directly contradict each other. Hadith must directly contradict each other, such that both rulings cannot be applied at the same time, and there's no way to reconcile them. I think this is very, very, very clear. So when there exists no other way to explain the two rulings, you resort to nask, you resort to abrogation, right? So there you go. However, here's a little subtlety we must remember. Therefore, if one of the rulings can apply to a specific case and the other ruling to a different case, this cannot be considered an example of nask. So you can have contradictory rulings that have an application. So yeah, ponder that. Do what thou wilt sounds like the quote from Aleister Crowley in the Occult Spiritual School of Thelema. That's exactly what it is. That's a very good call, DHC. Yeah, I've said that before on other streams on other channels. Yes, but that's exactly what it is. This is the will that Crowley and others refer to. Yes, that's exactly it. So the nasikh ruling must have been revealed after the manuk, right? The abrogating must come after the abrogated, or else there cannot have been abrogation. So for the claim of nasikh to be substantiated, a later ruling must have repealed an earlier one. So he mentions here, for instance, rulings, there's 187 and 866, which abrogate each other, right? So this can be ascertained in two ways. Either there's a direct reference in the ruling concerning the previous ruling, or the relative time frame of the verses in question is known. Right, so there are some rules there. In other words, it must be known for certain that the one ruling came after the other. Now notice, the Hadith don't have any sort of time sequence. It's very hard. So the scholars know, but you don't. They don't tell you, so you can't know. They keep you in the dark, and they keep their own Muslims in the dark. So Sunnah may abrogate the Quran. Allah can do anything but enter into his creation. That is true. Yeah, Allah can do anything except he can't. So both the nasikh and mansikh rulings must originate in the Quran or the Sunnah. Fine, we've got that. He repeats this a lot, right? As for consensus, it is not possible for ijma to occur against an explicit command in the Quran or Sunnah. Therefore, Allah has the right. So, in other words, only Allah has the right to abrogate any command that originated from him, either in the Quran or through the tongue of his prophet. So Muhammad can abrogate the words of Muhammad in the Sunnah can abrogate the Quran. The words of Muhammad in the Sunnah can abrogate Allah. Understand that Allah has the right, and this is Yaser Qadhi saying this, Allah has the right to abrogate any command that originated from Allah, either in the Quran or through the tongue of Muhammad. Where do we see the words of Muhammad? In the Sunnah. So yeah, so now we have evidence that the Sunnah abrogates the Quran. So, as was mentioned in the previous section, nask can only occur within the Quran and Sunnah. Nasikh ruling can come only from the Quran or the Sunnah, and mansukh rulings can only be found in the Quran and Sunnah. So, putting these together, there are four logical scenarios of nasikh with regards to the sources of nasikh and mansukh. 1. The Quran can abrogate the Quran. This is agreed upon by all who consider the validity of nasikh, and it's become ijma. It's a fait accompli. Some guy can complain and moan about it all he wants. It's already a done deal. It's done. It's in the Sharia. It's done. It's fixed. No changing it. An example of this is the waiting period of a widowed lady. Initially, she was to be maintained from the wealth of a deceased husband for a period of 1 year. And those of you who die and leave behind their wives should bequeath to them a year's maintenance. Later on, this ruling was abrogated by the verse, and those of you who die and leave behind their wives should wait 4 months and 10 days. So 2:234, notice 2:234 comes before 2:240, but it abrogates it, which tells you that, remember, the Quran is not ordered chronologically. The Quran is mixed up generally by length of chapter. What people don't know is that the verses themselves are also mixed up inside of the chapters, right? So the Quran is not ordered chronologically from start to finish like the Bible. It's ordered by length of chapter, generally from the longest to the shortest, right? However, the verses inside the chapters are themselves mixed up. So understand, that's why 234 here can abrogate 240. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. But this tells you that this is what happens. Sunnah can abrogate Quran. Is Muhammad above Allah? Yes, he is. In fact, according to the Sharia, so pinpoint, according to according to the Sharia, Muhammad is synonymous with Allah. Allah is Muhammad. Muhammad is Allah. As far as the Islamic law is concerned, as far as Sharia is concerned, the two are the same. They speak with the same voice. They speak with the same authority. There is no difference between them in terms of the force of their actions and words as law. So yeah, make a note of that. The Quran abrogating the Sunnah is the second scenario. So the Quran can abrogate the Sunnah. So the first was Quran abrogates Quran. The majority of scholars have agreed to the validity of this type of nask. An example of this is the changing of the Qibla. Muslims used to pray towards Jerusalem by the command of the Prophet, but eventually the Quran revealed that the direction of Qibla was to be Mecca. So they prayed towards Jerusalem and then changed it. So we have seen the turning of your face, O Muhammad, towards the heavens. Surely we shall turn you to a Qibla that shall please you. So turn your face in the direction of blah, blah, blah. This is Quran 2:144. So the initial Qibla was based on the Sunnah, and the abrogation came down in the Quran. So the Quran is still capable of abrogating the Sunnah. Very, very interesting. So this incident is clear proof that the Quran can abrogate the Sunnah. So Muhammad never claimed to have spoken to Allah. That is true. He spoke to an angel in a cave. Yeah, sure. Angels in caves, right? How can they say they're the same and not be associates? That is exactly the case, DHC. How can they? Because, yeah, none of it makes sense. Now, the third type of abrogation is the Sunnah abrogates the Quran. So now this category is further subdivided into two categories. So a mutawatir hadith abrogates the Quran. So you didn't know this, but mutawatir hadith abrogates the Quran. This was allowed by Imam Malik, Abu Hanifa, okay, the Hanafi school, and one of the opinions of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So those are three of the founders of the schools of jurisprudence. The reason that both are forms of revelation from Allah. And of course, he's not mentioning Shafi here, but Shafi is the one who created the consensus that the Sunnah is revelation. So the Sunnah is considered wahi, W-A-H-Y. It is revelation, secondary revelation, right? So the Sunnah is wahi. So, and that's Shafi's doing. So, in other words, it's the agreement of all four of the founders of the school of fiqh that, yeah, the hadith can abrogate the Quran. And since both give indisputable knowledge that they may abrogate one another. So there you go. Hadith abrogate the Quran. And in fact, when they speak of Sunnah, they also speak of the Sirah. Right? Think of that. So an example of mutawatir hadith abrogating the Quran is the verse leaving the bequests to heirs. It is prescribed for you when one of you approaches death and he has wealth that he make a bequest to his parents and next of kin. That's 2:180. This ruling was abrogated by the hadith which said there is no bequest to an heir. Gewoon frank. Yeah, you mean Petra. Yeah, exactly. I happen to agree with Dan Gibson on that point. It makes perfectly good sense that Petra is the home. Yeah. Gewoon frank, greetings from Delft. Hello, Pinpoint and everyone. Yeah, awesome stuff. So yeah. So I guess you get this. The Sunnah definitely can abrogate the Quran, according to Yaser Qadhi. An ahad hadith. Now, this is a secondary level. It's not as authenticated as a mutawatir hadith, right? I have a show on this previously. So an ahad hadith is a secondary level. In other words, the chains of narration are not as secure. A mutawatir hadith could have, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 solid supposed chains of narration, or it could have 5, but these are like by solidly well-known people of great authority. So the authority of the chains of transmission, even though the number may not be so high, but the authority of the chains of transmission are very strong. Ahad has like 3, right? And maybe they're a little fuzzy, could be 1 or 2 a little suspect. So it's of a secondary level. It's not inauthentic, but it's certainly not considered as authentic as something that's mutawatir. But an ahad hadith can abrogate the Quran. Now, I does say most of the scholars did not allow this type of nasikh, since they reasoned that mutawatir, blah, 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 except they did. Ahad hadith can abrogate the Quran, according to Yaser Qadhi, although such occurrences are rare. It must be known for certain that the ahad narration occurred after the revelation of the verse. An example of this, according to Ash-Shakiti, is the prohibition of the flesh of domesticated donkeys. It is known that this occurred during the Battle of Khaybar and as such abrogated the previous ruling that was allowed by the understanding of 1645. So yeah, if you're hungry and there's nothing else to eat, you eat donkey. Well, suddenly, hey, the law just changed. Okay, fine, that's how it happens. So Imam Shafi did not allow the Quran to abrogate the Sunnah, nor the Sunnah to abrogate the Quran. He felt the Quran could only abrogate the Quran, and the same with the Sunnah. He felt it, but what did he write? What's the ruling? Because when you look at the Sharia, well, maybe it says something a little different. So hence, you got to double check everything this man says. The Sunnah, abrogating the Sunnah. So Hadith can abrogate Hadith. This was also allowed by all those who upheld the validity of nask. And this may be divided into multiple categories. So understand, Quran abrogates Quran, Quran abrogates Hadith, and Sunnah, right? Sirah. Sirah, Sunnah abrogate Quran, and Hadith abrogate, well, Sunnah abrogates Sunnah, whatever. So you got multiple different categories, and these are all valid. He's not giving us all the examples. He does not provide all the examples. The final understanding is within the Sharia. It's in the fiqh. You need to look there to get this. So greetings from Brussels. Hello there. Player faint. When Jews come to Muhammad to judge an adultery, he goes to Tawrat by passing Jesus in this matter. Yes. What happened to the surah of stoning? Yeah, exactly. But stoning is still valid, player faint. Stoning is still valid in Islam. It's very much in the Sharia. It's very much allowed. So, for instance, for adultery, which is a crime, stoning is very much allowed. In the case of a woman who's pregnant, you wait until the baby is born, until the baby can survive without the milk of its mother, and then you're allowed to stone the woman to death. So stoning is very much still Islamic law, and people do get stoned to death. So, a mutawatir hadith abrogating another mutawatir hadith. So, hadith abrogates hadith. An ahad hadith can abrogate another ahad hadith. A mutawatir hadith can abrogate an ahad hadith. An ahad hadith, a lower level of authority, right? Hadith can abrogate a mutawatir hadith. Interesting. The first three categories are agreed upon by all scholars. Now, he might say not all scholars agree with, let's say, the fourth category. Sure, he's saying there is disagreement. Doesn't mean there is no fixed ruling. The fact that there is disagreement doesn't mean that the ruling has not been fixed already. So it means that some guy somewhere at some time didn't like it, but today it's a fait accompli. The rulings are done. There is no discussion. It's done. So yeah, so there we go. Now, so I'm very much ending up here, so I'll be finishing in a moment. So abrogation. So now let's just a brief diversion to the Sharia, right? So looking at the reliance of the traveler. So abrogation, nask of revealed ruling by others, and they call it supersession, to supersede. So in the Sharia, we see here abrogation, nask of revealed rulings by other revealed rulings, called supersession. So the Sharia says it exists. Okay, another reference, this is within the index of the reliance of the traveler. Now let's look at manuk. What do they call it? A type of Quranic ruling, and it's called supersession. So what has been superseded, or what supersedes something else, replaces. Nasikh, Quranic ruling, supersession. So what's interesting is supersession, if you look through the Sharia, through the reliance, you're not going to find anything on this. I think this didn't make it into the book, or it's maintained in the original Arabic. Supersession, nask. Now, this is what I want to bring your attention to. Lloyd, you're destroying Islam with Islamic facts. Some people call that mean, we call that the truth. So let me get to some, so pinpoint. On that point, I need to tell you that in Islamic law, there's a concept called ghiba, Ghiba, ghiba. We know it as slander, okay? Now, in Western law, slander is if I lie about someone and I make that knowledge public. So if a newspaper prints a story saying that, someone did something and it, theft or whatever, or immoral, or just that embarrasses and defames them, right? You can sue because that's a lie. It's false, and it's provably false. So therefore, you can sue a slander. In Islam, ghiba, slander, is something completely different. In Islamic law, slander is to tell the truth, right? To tell the truth about someone, but it's a truth he doesn't want known because it's embarrassing to him. That's slander. So if you write the truth, if you speak the truth, in an Islamic context, but it's a truth that someone would prefer people don't know, they can sue you for slander. Interesting. So in Islamic law, slander is to tell the truth, but something embarrassing they don't want to know. So when we speak about Islam and we reveal things like the semen, on Muhammad's clothing that Aisha literally scraped off with her hands and fingernails, this is slander. Okay, that's why they say, why do you hate so much? You're spreading hate, because it is against the law to embarrass Islam. It is against the law to embarrass the Islamic nation. It's against the law to embarrass Allah, to embarrass Muhammad. This is against the law for Muslims to do, and it's against the law for us to do. Sharia applies to us as well, don't forget. So you are spreading slander, see, by doing this. It's true, yes, it's 100% true. It's verifiably, authentically, totally true, and it's against the law to do so. It's a crime. So that's slander in Islam. I hope that made sense. It makes no freaking sense, but yeah, I hope it made sense. So even though they had a goat, yeah. So Hadith abrogates Hadith KL? Yes, it does. How do you know which Hadith? You don't. You don't. They won't give you a list. They won't tell you. They'll confuse the hell out of you for sure. They'll do that for free any day. If you want to know what still remains, what you have to go to the Sharia manuals. If you want to know what verses are still valid, if you want to know what hadith are still valid, you have to go to the Sharia manuals, to Islamic law, because those legal texts contain the verses in their context. It explains them and applies them in context. The Sharia is the only way to know what Islamic verses and what hadith still apply or still valid. And if you look through the Sharia manuals and you read which verses, I mean, man, I'm gonna suck a number out of my thumb, but from reading the Sharia manuals as I have over the last few years, it must be maybe 200 verses, maybe 100. Hell, I don't know. There's not many verses from the Quran that actually made it into the Hadith. Very few. 100, maybe 200. I don't think it's more than that. So of all the 7,000 or 6,000 verses in the Quran, a couple of hundred at best, if I'm right, if I've counted correctly, I'm just, a couple of hundred at best have survived. 99% of the Quran has been abrogated. All that's left is a handful of verses that have made it into the Sharia. So yeah. Just some questions and comments. Everything contradicts itself, Malik. That is true. This is all Islamic slander. Exactly. I'm slandering Islam. That's exactly. Let me see. So the truth is very alien to Islam. Yes. Okay. So now supersession. Now notice supersession of all religions by Islam. So Islam claims to have abrogated all religions, including Christianity. So Islam abrogates us. Now they speak of Christianity, belief in the validity of as unbelief. What that means is that section 08.7, paragraph 20, and section W4.1, paragraph 2. It is kufr, right? It is apostasy for a Muslim to believe that Christianity is a valid religion. This is Islamic law. This is a very unambiguous, very clear ruling. For a Muslim to claim, for a Muslim to teach, for a Muslim to think, believe, or to say that Christianity is a valid belief is apostasy, because Christianity is invalid. It is din al-batil. It is worthless. In fact, batil is one of the names of Satan. So we are now a religion of Satan. Understand? It is unbelief. And of course, they speak of supersession of by Islam. We've been superseded by Islam. We are kafirs because we refuse to pray behind Muhammad. Right? We refuse to accept Muhammad's teachings. And of course, they speak of the delusions. Christians, the delusions of. Section S 1.2. Christians, the delusions of. We are deluded. I'll have a brief look into that in a minute. Right, now, Allah condemns the Jews and the Christians. Okay, does Allah condemn the Jews and Christians for anything besides being this way when he says they grasp at the paltry things of this low life and say, we shall be forgiven? So when Islam speaks of the delusions of the Christians, what they're saying is that we believe that we have forgiveness through the atonement, the death of Jesus. They're saying that we are deluded to think that this action brought us salvation. We are deluded in believing this. So if you look at Tafsir Ibn Kathir on Quran verse 7, Quran chapter 7 verse 169, they wish and hope from Allah while deceiving themselves. So we are deluded. So yeah, so just keep that in mind, guys. Okay, and that is the end of part 1. So let me have a look at Surah 9 abrogates the entire Quran. That's exactly so. Yaser Qadhi does go on in his book. If you read through the book, at the end, the conclusion, he speaks of chapter 9. And he does talk about it. And he says, yeah, basically it abrogates everything. And then he goes and says, no, it doesn't. Read it yourself. I mean, hell, maybe I'm wrong. But he reads it He goes, yeah, yeah, it abrogates this, it abrogates all the agreements, it abrogates everything that came before it abrogates all understanding. We're not supposed to be nice to Christians. All these things that tell us to be patient and tolerant, it actually abrogates the lot, go and kill them. And then he says, actually, well, basically, no, there's no real evidence of abrogation, and there's maybe 5 verses abrogated, and actually, actually, no, 9:5 doesn't abrogate anything. It abrogates everything, but it doesn't abrogate anything. Read it yourself, see if it makes sense to you. Maybe I'm stupid. Hell, I don't know. But read it yourself, download the book, check it out, and see his conclusion. I would question anything he says there, because you can go to the Sharia itself, and the Sharia is very explicit. There is no confusion there. So, yeah. So, yeah, Hadith over Quran and the Sharia. That is exactly the case, pinpoint. So, Sunan Abu Dawud, Aisha, wife of the Prophet, and Salama said, Aisha used to ask the daughters of her sisters and the daughters of birth to give him breastfeed 5 times. Yeah, disgusting stuff. So Muhammad is the Antichrist, exactly. But don't forget, in Islam, they think Jesus is not the Antichrist. Our concept of Jesus, not their Isa, but our Jesus is the Antichrist in Islam. So yeah, guys, final point. If you're a Muslim, you will let me know what school of fiqh you follow, because then I can check your Sharia manuals and see if you're talking out of your backside, right? And if you refuse to provide sourced, verifiable legal rulings, I don't think that when you say, I think that, no, that's not valid. Tell me what your scholars say. Tell me what the founders of your school of fiqh say. Tell me what's written in Islamic law. I really don't care what you think. I'm not interested, right? I don't want your fairy tale opinions. If you are Muslim and are going to comment, you will provide this information. I'll just delete your comments. I really don't care. Honestly, I don't care. So, yeah. And books you can use are Reliance of the Traveler, the Umdat al-Salik. Okay, and there's the Hedaya, which is the most common. So technically, so the Reliance is a summary document. It's a very, very good Sharia manual summary of everything. And the Hedaya is still in use today, right? The Hedaya is very much, it's 4 volumes. It's 2,652 pages, if I counted them correctly. That is still very much, because it's part of the Hanafi school of jurisprudence. Although when they say that this book belongs to this school of jurisprudence, it doesn't mean it's strictly that, because they all reference each other. Right? They all reference each other. They all reference rulings from different schools, because different scholars were experts in a given field. So they will use this guy from this school. His expertise on this particular subject will go into the other schools. So they can't tell you, well, that's Hanafi and we're Shafi and we just don't. Yeah, nonsense. Don't believe that. Okay. So yeah, I will link those in the description. The links to these books. You're welcome to look through those. KL. So when Yaser Qadhi invited James White to speak and share the gospel in the mosque, was that a violation of Sharia? Look, that's PR, right? That's PR. Technically, it is. Technically, but don't forget, there's rukhsa. There's also different levels of deception, right? If Islam is a political system, then it's allowed to have PR. They're allowed to do anything. Remember, you can break this. Look, just like Eskimos have like 20 words for snow, Islam has like 9 words for lying, right? Your major doctrine of lying is called hiyal, right? Legal trickery, legal deception, right? Because Islam's a religion of lawyers, right? This all falls under rukhsa, which is facilitation, which allows you to break just about every tenet of Islam for convenience sake, right? And hiyal is how to do that. And then all the other forms of deception fall under that, right? The basis is hiyal, but the fact is it's allowed to lie, right? And don't forget, lying is obligatory in Islam if the aim that you want to achieve is obligatory. So in Islam, and I've covered this in other shows and we can do this another time, but the Sharia makes it obligatory to lie. It is compulsory to lie if achieving the goal is obligatory, right? So yeah, guys. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, please, yeah, like, share, subscribe, all of that kind of good stuff. Let people know, and understand. You need to understand the Sharia. You need to read through these manuals, and don't take everything you read at first glance as the truth. Right? Sometimes you need to get a second opinion, because they will lie to you, and they will lie to. If they will lie to Muslims, they'll lie to you. Right. So yeah, and of course, don't forget this. When you're 6 and he's 53, because yeah, that's Islam for you, right? Yeah, that's the end of my presentation. So yeah, any last minute questions, then I'll call it a day, guys. And ja, dag sê, dis goed van julle om dis goed van julle van die Nederland ja, dis goed van julle van die Nederland hier te wees. Ek is baie bly dat julle hier is. Ek praat so min Afrikaans, ek vergeet so langsam. Ja, kan julle my verstaan as ek Afrikaans praat? Verstaan julle my? So just wait till the afternoon, it will be abrogated. Yeah, thank you, Dejan. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so guys, share this let people know, study this, and if you have questions, drop them in the comments, and I'll do another live stream. Let me know if you want me to do another live stream at some point. And thanks again, guys. So yeah, I gotta call it. I gotta get some dinner. I worked late today, so I did this after work, and I have to get some food and take a break. My throat is, yeah. So guys, yeah, thank you very much. I'm gonna call it a night, and I hope that was helpful. And I'll see you guys on Sunday. I'll be doing another stream with AT. We'll be doing the Apostle Paul again. All right. Hasta la pasta. Thanks, guys. Bikkie. Ja, nee, als ik stadig praat, dan ik glo je sal my verstaan as ek so 'n bietjie stadiger praat. Nee. En as jy heel stadig praat, dan kan ek julle ook goed verstaan. And hope faith, ja, ek moet meer Afrikaans praat. Ja, as ek by die huis is, dan praat ek so 'n bietjie Afrikaans, maar ja, maar op die oomblik, ek meen ek is nou hier in Pole, so ja, ek praat net Engels en amper geen Afrikaans nie. For my German friends, ja, ich habe wenig Gelegenheit, Deutsch zu reden, denn ich, ja, ich habe zuletzt, ich glaube, etwa im März Deutsch geredet, als ich in der Schweiz war. Naja, wenn ich mehr Gelegenheit, meine Sprachen zu üben, werden sie besser. Außerdem vergesse ich mein Deutsch langsam, mein Afrikaans langsam. Nur mein Englisch wird gut und auch ich lerne kein, wie sagt man, kein Polnisch. Weiß nicht, wie man das auf Deutsch sagt. Okay, guys, thanks, guys. I gotta call it a night. Okay, I gotta practice my Polish. So, yeah, do widzenia, guys. We'll